Now, the American public is quickly losing any faith they may have had in President Joe Biden, but you know that already. The non-partisan Penn-Wharton budget model has revealed that just 1 in 4 Americans believe that Biden's Inflation Reduction Act will actually reduce inflation, while 71% say the law will either have no impact or make things worse. That is a dud bill, if you ask me. There's no confidence from the public. It's also a bill coupled with regulations that force investment in domestic energy production while promoting clean energy. But of course, in Europe, there's a mad panic on to shore up baseload power supplies, oil, gas, coal, nuclear in particular, to avoid the impacts of Putin's gas ban and to keep the lights on. To discuss this and more, I'm joined live now from Malmo in Sweden by Copenhagen Consensus President Bjorn Lomborg. His latest book, by the way, hits all the nails on the head, all of the ones that I've just raised. It's titled False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor and Fails to Fix the Planet. Bjorn, thank you very much for your time. Is Biden's Inflation Reduction Act better or worse than what that poll indicates, do you think?
Well, it's certainly not going to achieve very much, Chris. So the poll was on whether it's going to affect inflation. But most people think of this as a climate act. And in many ways, that's also true. It spends almost 400 American U.S. billions on climate, and it's going to achieve almost nothing. So I thought it was kind of weird that they kept on saying, oh, this is the biggest thing we've ever done, and it's going to really solve global warming. So I took their estimates of how much it's actually going to reduce carbon emissions and plugged it into the UN climate model. It turns out that if we're very, very generous, probably way too generous, it'll cut about 1.5/100th of a degree centigrade by the end of the century. More realistically, it's going to cut less than half of 1/1000th of 1 degree centigrade by the end of the century. It's literally not going to matter.
And it'll cost billions, you're saying?
It'll cost $369 billion US. And again, Chris, this simply shows us we have this tendency when it comes to climate to say it's a huge problem, so we should just throw any and all money at it and try and see if we can make any difference. But of course, the problem here is it's not about whether rich, well-meaning Americans or Australians or Europeans want to spend lots of billions on subsidizing ineffective solar, wind, electric cars, you name it. It's a question of whether we can get everybody else, so China, India, the rest of Asia, Africa, which is going to be the predominant part of the emissions in the rest of the 21st century, to cut their emissions. And they're not going to look at this and say, wow, we can get to spend, and waste $400 billion and do nothing. That's not money they can afford, and it's not money that they're going to be spending here first. So again, we need to focus on making green energy much cheaper through innovation, rather than just subsidizing existing technology.
Spot on. And you're so right about China and India. If they don't budge, and nothing Joe Biden has done will impact on them, that is, it won't convince them to go down an even more expensive route. That won't happen. Now, I just want to ask you about what's happening in the world. If most of the world is struggling with higher energy prices, and look at Europe at the moment, UK in particular, Europe, it's time to improvise bailout plans and emergency measures to spare consumers from damaging economic pain come winter. We've got to take a different route now that there's a war in Ukraine, don't we?
Well, so first of all, we need to recognize that this was preceded way before the Ukraine war. So a lot of the global establishment has been telling us for a very long time, we can get rid of all fossil fuels and we can just go on solar and wind and all these other beautiful technologies. But the reality, of course, is that the world gets about 4/5 of its energy from fossil fuels. But what has happened is that the investment in fossil fuels has dropped about half over since Paris Agreement in 2015. So we've seen a dramatic decline in investment into new fossil fuels. Now, a lot of Greens would applaud that, but the reason, or sorry, the cost of that is that the effect of that is that it means we now have much more expensive fossil fuels. Yes, the war in Ukraine also matters, But the fundamental point is we've made fossil fuels so hard to get that it's now becoming almost unaffordable for everyone. And given that we still will need fossil fuels for a very long time to come, this is going to be very damaging. Yes, in Europe, we'll probably have to talk about subsidizing people because they won't be able to afford their energy this winter. But of course, that actually makes the problem worse, because the reason why the prices are going up is because there's not enough fossil fuels. And if you subsidize it, you actually just make that whole problem larger.
Yes, exactly. The rich world's fossil fuel hypocrisy is certainly on full display. We've discussed this at a previous interview. In its response to the global energy crisis triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, you've got the wealthy G7 countries admonishing the world's poor to use only renewables because of climate concerns. But Europe and the US are begging for Arab nations to expand oil production. Germany is reopening coal power plants. Spain, Italy ramping up African gas production. As you say in your book, the renewable religion hurts poor nations the most, right?
Absolutely. Look, we got rich off of fossil fuels. And then we're telling the poor, well, you know what? You don't need to do that. But they want to. They are looking at China, which basically lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty with lots and lots of fossil fuels. Now, there is a problem with global warming, and that's, of course, why we should be investing a lot more in research and development to make sure we find the solutions that are actually going to power the rest of the 21st century with little or no CO2 emissions. But it's immoral, and it's also impossible to tell the poor world to say, no, you can't go down the same route. Of course they want to do the same thing. India, Africa want to do what China did. And unless we can show them a better way, and right now we're showing them much, much worse ways. We're basically showing the way of Germany. Hey, we're going to give up on fossil fuels. We're going to just rely on gas from Putin's Russia. We're going to close down our nuclear power plants, and we're going to be in a huge problem. That's not the way you make societies work, and it's not the way you advertise how to be smart and green to the rest of the world.
Just very quickly, while I've got you there, question without notice. What are you hearing about the future in small modular nuclear reactors? Is it promising?
So, yes, it's very promising. So, look, nuclear power is the only way that we know we can produce baseload, so 24/7 power without CO2 emissions. So we should definitely be looking into it. The current generation, the third generation, is still very expensive, which is why not more are putting up more nuclear power plants. Fourth generation promises to be small, modular, very, very industrial production, very safe and very cheap. Now, again, that's also what they said about the other generations of nuclear power. So we should definitely be testing this. We should be a little skeptical, but it'd be amazing if it could work. Because if we have that cheap power, then of course everyone, China, India, Africa, is going to buy these. They're going to industrialize, they're going to become rich, and they're not going to emit CO2. So that would be amazing.
Spot on, it would be amazing. Bjorn Lomborg, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.